Okay, good morning all. Glad to be here. Good to see everybody this morning. Sorry I missed yesterday morning. Would love to have been here to kick it all off. But looking at the agenda, looks like I have a packed agenda, and I see many friendly faces out there, so it's good to be home. I'm a resident here in Corvallis, so pretty natural for me to be here today. And what is compelling as I speak, and I figured I'd just kick it off right at the front end, post-recovery from wildfire. When we think about investments, policies, engagement, how we interact with fire in this state, you'll see much of my presentation is about mitigation, readiness, response. And it's compelling because we stopped short of recovery. We made significant investments in the state following the 2020 fire season in the range of $500 million in recovery. But the work you're doing and the research today will drive policy investments to the future about sustainable investments in recovery. We have to complete the circle of emergency management, which is mitigation, readiness, response, and recovery in totality. So I wanted to begin and start off the conversation about where academic falls on the front end of conversation, completing the circle, about how we are going to address more challenging, complex emergencies as we move for the future. As mentioned, Doug Grafe worked for Governor Tina Kotek as a policy advisor on wildfire and emergency response. Prior to that, with Governor Brown as a Wildfire Programs Director. And I'll be mainly focusing today on the wildfire programs and the investments from the legislature into the wildfire programs that was established in 2021 following the 2020 dramatic fire season. And what drove us to this spot clearly was the evolution of fire on the landscape. Of course, you can translate this across the West, but we'll focus here on Oregon. 2 decades ago, we were in the range of about 288,000 acres burned on an annual basis. What's compelling in this slide, these are I'll show 3 slides, 10-year increments. We see the first entry of mega fires once again on the landscape. Does anyone recall that fire, Southwest Oregon? Biscuit, 2002. Many of you are probably on the fire line. Some of you read about it. And it's good to have a full range of perspective on this. Definitely was an indicator for us, particularly as you look at the concentration of fires on the east side, enter large fires on the west side. But did that drive significant policy change? And of course, it drove conversation, but impactful, lasting policy change. I didn't see much of that following that. The next slide, I think, drives it home a little bit more as we're still in the space that we can manage this situation or control fire completely, as opposed to changing the paradigm of how we're going to live with fire more effectively. We're still in the mode of ability to snuff out every fire possible across the landscape. We absolutely, you know this, live with fire. It's on the landscape. This slide is about 342,000 acres. What's compelling here is the entry of fires in the landscape in southeast Oregon. Mega fires continuing. This is the beginning of our drought conditions in 2012, for those who recall that year. Burned just over 1 million acres in southeast Oregon. Eye-opening for that region. Established more suppression, readiness, response programs there with the Rangeland Fire Protective Associations. Over $1 million invested in those. It's the first general fund investment within that region since 1964, which was the establishment of those Range Fire Protective Associations. At that time, I think we had approximately 7 associations operating, volunteers, neighbors helping neighbors. We're at 25 now, based on that experience in 2012. The next slide highlights the current condition we're in. The past decade, we moved to 635,000 acres on an annual basis burned across all lands. across all ownerships. Compelling, again, is the distribution of the megafires. I'm using megafires as 500,000 acres, 100,000 acres or larger. Prevalence across the landscape, particularly on the west side now. Impacting communities. As you look through these slides, and I've pored over these for quite some time now, you start to think about fires of this size on the landscape and their interaction with communities. And then that drives public policy discussions and funding and program developments, which is why I'm here today in this position with you all. We must think about the true cost of wildfire, of course, and it's never just the suppression costs, but as we think about the evolution of how science influences policy and program development, we often looked at wildfire at just the suppression cost. And accumulating the loss is critically important. When you add all the factors on the left side, loss of infrastructure, cultural resources, tourism, etc., recovery, following the 2020 Labor Day fires I mentioned, multiple studies, in the range, I'm very comfortable saying 10x the cost of suppression, changing the dialogue from what did fire season cost us this year? Oh, $20 million, $10 million, now to $80 million. It's far beyond the suppression cost, but that's how we've always talked about wildfire cost at the legislature, driving policies, budgeting, and programming. And the conversation certainly has changed when you add in all the other factors that wildfire is impacting these days as you reflect back on those maps. And driven by that reality, Oregon acts. Starts with Governor Brown initiating a council, 100 volunteers. I'm sure some of you in this room participated, 42 recommendations to advance fire protection in the state of Oregon. Consistent investment and program development in mitigation, readiness, and response. So I'll continue to leave that footprint for you all and inspire you that the future's coming and some steady recovery investments are necessary if we're going to set up the next generations to have a different relationship with fire on the landscape. How are we managing the landscapes? How are we reinvesting in those landscapes, readying our communities, etc.? $195 million invested. You can see where that went, consistent with the National Cohesive Strategy, and that's landscape resiliency, fire-adapted communities, and readiness and response. And I would emphasize the ease to invest in response and readiness. The future where we need to be is in the mitigation side, community, fire-adapted communities, and consistent programming around recoveries to restore communities, develop communities in a different way, and the landscapes to be more prepared for the reality of increasing wildfire on the landscape for all the reasons you know. So we're in this evolution, and again, you play a critical role. On the academic side of the equation, I really appreciate the influence of science as we develop policies at the legislature. I definitely lean on the universities as I do my work in that advisory role. I'm trying to inspire you all at 8 in the morning. How am I doing? All right? Okay, I see a few hands up there. That's great. Okay, significant investment. Not uncommon across the West, certain California and Washington in particular, significant investments across the West to advance fire protection. And that's where we put our dollars. Of course, very effective work on the wildfire suppression investments continued, but with a new reality that fires are integrating with communities, intersecting with communities far greater than in the past. I think the reality of wildfire on the landscape has moved from a natural resource conversation to more a larger social conversation. And that's really important to understand and where we need to focus our attention on program investments. And following the National Cohesive Strategy, in my mind, still remains the right strategy with the landscape resiliency, community adaptations, and response. Electrical systems was a significant conversation in terms of investments. We saw this first year, 2022, where we shut off power with public safety power shutoffs for the first time with intentionality during the Labor Day events of 2022, which you do not read about in the papers, largely because of this effort here. Before we turn power back on, much of this along the west slope of the Cascades, you look at these photos, trees and limbs in the power lines, remove the limbs, trees, restore the power before we turn it back on. These seem like obvious decisions to us now, but it takes some effort, some dedication and energy to build programs, policy, and laws to establish this types of behavior, which is absolutely necessary in our future. One of the most compelling investments in Senate Bill 762, which passed to advance fire protection in Oregon. So this is a crisis avoided because of good program policy investments and leadership in the Public Utility Commission. Does anyone remember 22 Labor Day events? Did anyone have, wake up in cold sweats like myself in early September and seeing an east wind event coming at us again? Some of you. Okay, sorry about that, but critically important work. And to do this right, and I appreciate bringing the human element to this, is supporting Oregonians during this experience. I was really proud of the utilities, lots of opportunities for communication and engagement. So I feel like they did this right. Landscape resiliency, significant treatments across the landscape. This is on the mitigation side of the equation before the fire begins. Your world is post-recovery. And, they're very related in many ways. Looking for ecological balance, mitigating, taking out the catastrophic nature of wildfire by reducing fuel loading, focusing our attention where it matters most in and around our communities and moving out across the landscape. Lots of discussion around efficacy and mitigation at this time, so keep up the good work and understanding there. There's a big story to tell and understand to maintain future investments in this landscape. Prescribed fire is a significant part of this conversation and has to be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the public health side of the equation. How do we get to scale on these treatments and be effective across the landscape? But significant interest, $25 million, small woodlands and large landscape scale projects, and you can see 2 times the amount of applicants for those projects for the large scale work, and then the small community work, 80 projects requested, but only 20. Ability to fund 20, even with that significant investment. So there's certainly an appetite here. Local folks understand how that works and are interested in more of that landscape resiliency work. They'd rather do it pre-fire, for sure. And the post-fire is reactionary, of course, in your world, and we have to set up the landscape for the future. But let's get to that work on the front end. Another investment, very proud of this, frankly, and you won't see this across the West, but Oregon invested in public health. We knew we could not have a conversation about increased prescribed fire, living with the reality of more fire on the landscape without protecting and having conversations around public health. Our investments included community response planning through Department of Environmental Quality. We looked at air quality systems in public spaces through Department of Human Services, and then Oregon Health Authority with residential smoke filtration system programs to the tune of about $12 million investments across the board in Senate Bill 762 on that front. Critically important, 1,000 residential smoke filtration systems were sent into Oak Ridge this year. with the fire just east of that town. And critically timed, another 4,000 were deployed across the state, and another 5,000 residential systems will be deployed this spring. So durable and sustainable investment programs, we need to understand the efficacy of these investments and the work around public health, but absolutely critically important to succeed long-term if we're going to be ready for increased fire across the landscape. Again, very proud of Oregon's work here on this front. Conservation Corps is another shining spot within the investments, and I'm hoping you're seeing the comprehensive conversation around investments in Oregon here. I don't have enough time or enough slides today to walk through this, but I'm highlighting a few of the key elements as we have a comprehensive approach to addressing wildfire in the state of Oregon, and investing in our youth and investing in community fuel reductions is a clear example here. Under Higher Education Coordination Commission, $10 million invested in youth programs to reduce fuels around our communities. These folks are doing great work. I met with several of the crews, inspiring. They're engaging in the communities. Folks want to do more of this work and understand how they can protect their individual homes and be part of a neighborhood effort. And what better way to inspire that through development of youth into the natural resource space. This program has been exceptional. Investments in community protections, of course, was a big focus in the first investment here with Senate Bill 762. I just wanted to list a few of the grant programs, well, more than a few, quite a bit of investments, and I wanted to just show the expanse of those investments. Just over somewhere in $100 million, including the suppression and readiness components, are focused in and around our communities. Lots of lessons learned across the West with the intersection of fire in our communities. So proud of these investments, and I'll pause there. And I did that without bringing up my presentation. I had it on the table, but decided to roll with it. So my apologies for turning my head a few times there to keep focused. But I will take questions. We have 5 minutes left. Thank you. Okay, I didn't seed any here, folks. Should I have? I don't think so.
Can you stand up and speak loudly or move to a microphone so we can capture what you have to say better? Anybody?
Cass.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about the lessons learned from the power shutoff, and particularly how you all, the communication was clearly great. We heard about it a lot as sort of and citizens, but how are you thinking about the people who can't live without power and how you do those kind of mitigations the way you've done in the smoke space?
Yeah, the question is how can we improve the public safety power shutoffs? How well did we do? There were the communication I thought was very solid, and the utilities, from my experience and the feedback I've received, and I'm happy to hear otherwise, but outreach to all the consumers was absolutely key. So 95% of the work on the public safety power shutoffs was readiness, and that was communication with the consumers. My experience with that is the three investor-owned utilities within the state have significant resources and did a very good job at that outreach. I think the consumer-owned utilities may need to work with those closer as they do their work and ensure they've got the resources to be supportive of all the consumers. Temporary shelters and centers were set up for those who couldn't live without power for some time. So in my mind, I felt like we hit the mark, and the question of putting the humanity in the conversation, you know, starting with Oregonians, are we serving Oregonians well during this time of no power? I felt like we hit the mark, but I'm definitely interested in hearing from folks, their personal experiences and what we can do better. Got a question over here?
Yeah, can you speak a little to the grants and if they're for individual landowners or for like groups to apply for other landowners? Can you speak a little bit to that process?
I'm assuming the small woodland program or, yeah, for landscape management?
Yes, exactly. Thanks. I didn't clarify that well.
Yeah, no problem. There's, at one time, I think I had 7 rulemaking processes going concurrently with about 8 new grant programs providing support and coordination for. So a lot of investments there. And one of them was a small woodlands program, and that's meeting small woodlands who largely own the landscapes in and around our communities, and in many ways are the first line of defense around our communities. Are we managing these forests and range landscapes effectively in the face of increased wildfire to reduce that catastrophic nature? And that's what I mentioned in the slide where it was Department of Forestry is the place to go to talk about that grant programs. A significant portion of it was Firewise programming development. So where communities are establishing Firewise programs or looking for further investments in those programs, and individual forest landowners who are used to working with, say, NRCS, for example, for those type of thinning and forest management programs, had another program on the docket with Department of Forestry, and a huge appetite for that work, frankly. And I mentioned 80 applicants with only 20 funded for that particular program of $5 million. So certainly an appetite with small woodlands to do continued work. We've got one in the middle and then on the side, and I don't know who's first.
Yeah, one quick question and one quick comment. Do you happen to know the name of your counterpart in the state of Washington?
Of interest, I do not have a counterpart yet.
That's why I couldn't think of it. Quick comment or policy recommendation. I operate a little bit more in Washington, but also in Oregon, and I don't know if the landscape has changed here, but a lot of this audience are agency personnel, but there are a lot of academics and students, and it has been really challenging for folks not getting a paycheck from an agency to get fire line certification, red cards. And I don't know if there's something that could even be done at the state level to allow students, college students, graduate students, researchers, academics who are not employed by a state or federal agency to have an easier time getting certified to help with the efforts. It also made it really challenging to have the academics swell the ranks to help do monitoring and response immediately following the fire. So policy recommendation, make it easier for people to get red carded who aren't getting a paycheck from an agency.
Thank you for that. I love it. I cut my teeth in fire in Southeast, which is obvious, right? Born and raised in the Southeast, right? All right, I'm from Boston, but I studied natural resources in Florida, and I exited that program with the basic fire programs. And of course, light years ahead in terms of prescribed fire use down there. Of course, they're living in a different landscape than we have here. We build our communities in bowls as opposed to a flat, open landscape with ocean on either side, more opportunity. But for the programming, I know OSU has expanded the fire program, and my understanding is, you know, there's lots of opportunities, and I'm seeing some professor heads nodding to come out of the programs with those basic firefighting skills to be ready and employable. I would encourage that, and that's a great comment. I think it set me in my motion where I am today. I knew fire and natural resources was, forest management was such a huge intersection. I just chose the discipline of fire as I continued my career. But I don't look back, and I look back to those opportunities early on.
And I believe Clackamas Community College also has a program, so let's not forget the community colleges who may not be here today.
Thank you. Outstanding. Okay. I will be around for a bit. Yeah. Sorry about that.